The night was alive with glitz and glamour, the perfect picture of wealth and prestige. The ballroom sparkled with elegant chandeliers, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Arias Velmont, the CEO of a cutting-edge tech company, stood tall and commanding as usual, his reputation preceding him wherever he went. He'd spent years building his empire, and tonight he was its shining star. But then, as if the room suddenly shifted, his eyes met hers across the crowd. Sophia. A chill ran down his spine, despite the warmth of the evening. It was as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. She stood at the entrance, poised and serene, the kind of elegance that didn't demand attention but commanded it all the same. Her presence, even after all these years, cut through the noise of the room. For a moment, he was lost in her gaze, the years of absence slipping away. She was no longer the woman he had left behind, vulnerable and heartbroken. She was stronger now, a force of nature in her own right, and she wasn't the fragile Sophia he had walked away from all those years ago. Arias's heart raced, but it wasn't excitement or desire that stirred him. It was regret, pure, unrelenting regret. How many of us have walked away from something or someone thinking that the grass was greener on the other side, only to realize too late the price of our decisions? We convince ourselves that the choices we make are for the best, that the things we leave behind no longer matter. But the truth is, time has a way of revealing what we thought we'd left behind. Arias had everything: success, wealth, power. He thought leaving Sophia for Zara was a move towards something better. But tonight, the truth hit him hard. In his quest for more excitement, more thrill, more luxury, he had lost the one thing that truly mattered. When Arias saw Sophia again, it wasn't just a reunion. It was a confrontation with his past mistakes. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had chosen to discard, had come back stronger than ever. And the silence between them now spoke volumes, volumes of the years lost, the family torn apart, and the deep regret that Arias had buried for so long. Arias knew in that moment that the decision he made all those years ago wasn't just about losing Sophia. It was about losing himself. What happens when a man who had everything, the power, the wealth, the admiration, finally sees the truth of what he has lost? Can he ever recover from the choices that once seemed so easy to make? Arias thought he had it all figured out. He left the quiet, stable life he had built with Sophia, chasing the excitement of a new romance, new desires, and a future he thought would bring him more happiness. But as he locked eyes with Sophia across that room, he realized something shocking. The life he had built with Zara, the life he had fought so hard to attain, felt empty now. His success, his fame, his company, they no longer filled the void. He had thought the future would give him what the past couldn't. Instead, it had stolen everything that truly mattered. Can Arias find redemption, or will the weight of his past mistakes keep him locked in a prison of silence forever? The chance for a second chance is right in front of him, but the question remains, does he deserve it? As he stands there, paralyzed by his own regret, Arias faces the harsh truth. The life he left behind has moved on. Sophia is no longer waiting for him to fix things. She's no longer the woman he can control or manipulate with empty apologies. She's strong, independent, and, most painfully for him, beyond his reach. Now, he must confront the true cost of his actions, not just the loss of his marriage, but the loss of his integrity, his connection to his own humanity. Will this be the moment he finally faces the consequences of his choices? Or will he retreat back into the hollow life he has created? This is just the beginning of Arias's journey, a journey filled with regret, redemption, and a battle for what truly matters. But what do you think? Can someone truly redeem themselves after abandoning everything they once loved? If you've ever been faced with the consequences of your own choices, you know that sometimes the hardest thing is learning how to forgive yourself. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to follow Arias's journey and see whether he can find the redemption he's desperately seeking. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Sophia should give him a second chance? Or is it too late for Arias to ever make things right? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Arias Velmont and Sophia had once been two young dreamers, their hopes and ambitions fueling a love that seemed invincible. In their early days when Arius was just starting out, they shared everything. Long nights of brainstorming ideas, sharing struggles, and supporting each other through the sleepless grind. The world was vast, yet it felt like they could conquer it together. They weren't rich, far from it, but they had something that no one could take away, their shared vision. Sophia was always by his side, her gentle encouragement and steady presence, grounding him when the weight of the world seemed too heavy. Their apartment was modest, yet filled with laughter, and it was in that small space that Arius's dreams began to take shape. Arius remembered those early mornings vividly. The way Sophia had always been there with a cup of coffee, her eyes filled with quiet optimism as they'd discuss their plans. Even in the moments when the bills piled up and the business seemed on the verge of failure, Sophia's unwavering belief in him kept him going. They were partners in every sense of the word, partners in struggle, in ambition, and in love. But that love, as strong as it had once been, began to fade as Arius's career took off. His startup, once a dream, quickly morphed into a force that couldn't be ignored. Soon, Arius's name was everywhere. Tech conferences, magazine covers, business awards. His world became one of constant meetings, gala events, and appearances. Sophia, his rock, the one person who had believed in him from the beginning, began to feel like a distant memory. As Arius's company expanded, so did the space between him and Sophia. The late nights spent in boardrooms and the endless flow of emails began to eclipse the evenings they used to share. Arius, consumed by his success, grew more focused on his growing empire and less on the woman who had always been by his side. Sophia didn't say much at first. She could see how important the company was to him, and she knew how hard he worked. But the constant absence, the long hours, the missed dinners, the lack of communication began to take its toll on her. At first, she tried to hold on. She was patient, waiting for the man she had married to come back, to realize that their love deserved attention too. But with each passing day, Arius seemed further away, lost in a world that no longer included her. And though Arius told himself he was doing all of this for their future, Sophia could see the truth. He was doing it for something else entirely. His drive for success had begun to overshadow the very thing that had once mattered most to him. As Arius's company grew, so did his persona. What started as a simple dream between two lovers became a juggernaut that demanded more from him than he had ever anticipated. He became the face of innovation in tech, his name a constant in every business circle. The invites to exclusive events, the meetings with high-profile investors, and the attention from all corners of the industry were intoxicating. He told himself it was all for Sophia and their future. He convinced himself that he was doing it for them, for their children one day, for the life they would build together. But somewhere along the way, his ambition began to overshadow everything else. The boardrooms and social events became his new reality, and Sophia, his partner, his wife, began to feel like a distant memory. At first, it was just small changes. Late nights turned into entire weeks of being absent. Phone calls were replaced with text messages. Sophia, once his equal in all things, became a background figure in his life. She no longer sat beside him during the quiet mornings or helped him brainstorm new ideas. He justified it. After all, he was building something that would secure their future, something that could provide everything they'd ever dreamed of. But with each passing day, the distance between them widened. He didn't see it at first, but others did. His friends noticed, his colleagues noticed, and Sophia, she felt it in her bones. She was no longer his number one priority. His empire, his success, his reputation, they had all come to define him. And with that, the warmth that once existed between them began to cool. The little things, the soft touches, the shared glances, the whispered promises, were replaced with silence, with distractions. Arius couldn't bring himself to admit it, but deep down, he knew he was losing her. Not just losing her as a wife, but losing the person he had once been, the man who had worked beside her, the man who had found joy in the struggle, not just the end result. He had traded all of that for an image, for the idea of success. In the end, it wasn't just Sophia he was losing. It was his own sense of purpose. It was at a high-profile business event, one of the many Arius attended, in the name of expanding his company, where he first saw Zara Delacroix. She was everything Sophia wasn't: bold, unpredictable, and undeniably alluring. Zara had a presence that commanded attention the moment she entered the room. Her beauty was striking, but it was her confidence, her carefree attitude, that captivated Arius the most. While Sophia had been his constant support, Zara was the wild spark he'd been seeking. She was a breath of fresh air in a world that had become suffocating with responsibilities and expectations. Zara embodied excitement, the thrill of the unknown, the chase, the challenge of something new. She wasn't tied down by the past, and that freedom, that untamed energy, was exactly what Arius craved. At first, it was harmless. A few conversations here and there, some business chats at first, and then it escalated. What Arius didn't expect was how Zara made him feel alive. She laughed freely, spoke without restraint, and lived in a world where the rules didn't apply. She didn't need him to be a CEO or a symbol of success. She was interested in him as a man, not a brand. It was intoxicating. Sophia had always been a pillar of strength, but in Zara, Arius saw something different, a challenge, an escape from the structured life he had built. As the months passed, he found himself seeking out her company more and more, drawn to the way she made him feel like he was capable of anything. With Zara, there were no expectations, no weight on his shoulders. She was everything he told himself he needed. The thrill of the chase took over. It wasn't just about lust. It was about something deeper, something that filled the void he hadn't even realized existed. And in the midst of it all, Sophia, his wife, his partner, became less of a presence in his mind. The love he had once felt for her faded in the face of Zara's fire, her ability to make him feel desired, wanted, and needed in ways that had long been missing from his marriage. He began to justify it. He told himself that he had earned this distraction, that Sophia wouldn't understand what he was going through, that Zara was a part of the world he had now entered, one that wasn't bound by the quiet, familiar love he had shared with Sophia. In Zara's world, there were no rules. There was only passion, and with each passing day, the choice seemed simpler. He had been swept away by something new, something exciting, but in the back of his mind, the nagging feeling of guilt, of knowing he was betraying everything he once held dear, never quite left. The decision to leave wasn't an easy one. It was, in fact, the hardest thing Sophia had ever done. But the silence, the growing distance, and the betrayal weighed too heavily on her heart. She had tried for years to keep their family together, to hold on to the love that had once been so vibrant. But Arius had made his choice, and it wasn't her. Sophia packed their things quietly, the sound of her movements the only noise in their once shared home. The grand house that had been a symbol of their success now felt like a prison. The memories of their early days, their hopes, and their dreams together, everything that had once been so full of promise, seemed hollow now. She had stood by his side through every hardship, but now, with every step she took, she felt his absence more deeply. Arius, so consumed with his newfound world, hadn't even noticed. Or perhaps he had, but he hadn't cared. He was too busy with his business, too focused on the exciting new life he was building with Zara. The cracks had been forming for years, and now they were unrepairable. Sophia didn't want to stay in a home where her love was no longer reciprocated. So, with Darian in tow, she made the difficult decision to leave the life they had built together and return to the quiet coastal town where she had grown up. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't full of luxury, but it was peaceful. It was a place where she could find herself again. As she drove away from the house, away from Arius and the life they had built, Sophia felt a wave of emotions, sadness, anger, but also relief. She was done being invisible, done being the woman who waited for a love that no longer existed. It wasn't easy, but she knew it was the right thing to do for herself and for Darian. Her son had been her greatest joy, and she had made a promise to herself that she would give him the stability, the love, and the attention that Arius had long since stopped giving. In the quiet of the coastal town, Sophia rebuilt her life. She wasn't just a mother. She was a woman reclaiming her power. She went back to architecture, the career she had put on hold for Arius's dreams. The simplicity of life here allowed her to focus on what truly mattered: her son, her work, and her own healing. She had learned that love didn't need to be complicated. It just needed to be real. Though the pain of leaving Arius never completely disappeared, Sophia knew she had made the right choice. And in a way, she had reclaimed herself in the process. Arius's life with Zara was everything he had convinced himself he wanted. It was fast-paced, exciting, and full of the kind of luxury that only people like him could enjoy. His days were filled with high-powered meetings, extravagant dinners, and travel to exclusive destinations. Zara was by his side, always a stunning companion, always the life of the party. The attraction between them was undeniable, the chemistry palpable. Zara's presence was intoxicating. She was a woman who lived in the moment, who thrived on attention, and whose world revolved around excitement and indulgence. In many ways, she was the opposite of Sophia. Where Sophia had been grounded and steady, Zara was wild and unpredictable. She brought out a side of Arius he hadn't known existed, a side that craved adventure and constant stimulation. The nights were filled with parties in lavish penthouses, whispers of business deals being struck over glasses of champagne, and whispers of secrets shared in dimly lit rooms. Zara was his constant companion in this world, a world where success and appearances mattered above all else. But despite the luxury, despite the constant motion of business and social events, Arius felt something was missing. It wasn't something he could define at first, but as the months turned into years, the emptiness began to grow. The excitement of being with Zara, the thrill of new experiences, began to wear thin. She was beautiful, passionate, and exciting, but there was no depth. No foundation. Arius had told himself that this life was everything he had ever dreamed of. But as he lay awake at night, unable to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something important, something that no amount of money, power, or status could replace. He had traded his past, his love with Sophia, for a future filled with distractions. But now, in the quiet moments, the weight of what he had left behind seemed impossible to ignore. Zara had become his world, but Arius found himself questioning whether it was the world he truly wanted. In her, he saw the excitement of youth, but in his heart, he longed for something more, something real. Sophia's life had transformed in ways Arius could never have imagined. She had left behind the world of luxury, the penthouse apartments, the designer, clothes, and the glamorous events that had once defined her existence. Instead, she had built something more meaningful, more rooted. The coastal town, with its simple charm and quiet beauty, had become her sanctuary, a place where she could heal and rediscover herself. Raising Darian had become her focus. She poured all her energy into giving him the love and attention he needed, creating a stable, nurturing environment where he could flourish. Every day she watched her son grow stronger, more independent, and more confident. He was a reflection of everything she had worked for, the life she had chosen. But Sophia wasn't just a mother. She was also an architect, a career she had put aside for Arius's success, but had always felt a calling to return to. In the quiet moments when Darian was at school or playing with friends, Sophia would immerse herself in blueprints, design plans, and architectural journals. She reconnected with the work that had once brought her joy, rediscovering a passion she had let slip away for too long. Her small architectural firm, founded on her own hard work and determination, began to thrive. It wasn't the high-profile success Arius had attained, but it was fulfilling. She found herself waking up each day with purpose, the weight of her choices settling into something that felt right. She was no longer defined by the man she had married or the life she had left behind. Sophia had reclaimed her identity. As she stood at the edge of the coastline, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She had found peace within herself, and a sense of purpose that was entirely her own. The wounds of the past still lingered, but they no longer defined her. Sophia had become the woman she was always meant to be, and in her rebirth, she found a quiet strength that had been there all along, waiting for her to embrace it. As Arius basked in the fruits of his success, the weight of his decisions continued to sit heavily on his chest. The world saw him as a man who had it all, the powerful CEO of a flourishing company, the talk of every business circle, a glamorous lifestyle that many would envy. He had everything he thought he wanted: power, prestige, excitement, and a woman who fit perfectly into the image he had created. But behind the surface, something gnawed at him. a feeling he couldn't escape. Despite all his outward success, Arius felt an emptiness that became harder to ignore. The parties, the luxury, the endless business ventures, they no longer brought the joy they once did. Zara, though she filled the space next to him, wasn't the answer. Their relationship, filled with passion and adventure, lacked the depth that he had once shared with Sophia. Sophia's absence left a void that no amount of wealth could fill. His nights with Zara, while thrilling in their own right, felt shallow, incomplete. Arius had convinced himself that leaving Sophia had been the right choice. He had wanted more, needed more, and she no longer fit into the life he envisioned for himself. But the further he moved from their past, the more the guilt crept in. There were moments, late at night, when the noise of the world died down, that Arius would find himself staring into the distance, lost in thought. His mind would wander back to the quiet mornings with Sophia, the way she had always been there for him, supporting him when no one else did. He remembered the way her eyes had shone with love and belief in him when they had nothing, and how her unwavering faith in him had been his anchor. As he sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the luxury he had fought for, Arius felt a strange loneliness, a quiet ache in his chest that wouldn't go away. He would close his eyes, and for a brief moment he could see Sophia, her face, the warmth in her eyes. But it was always fleeting. The life he had built with Zara, the life that seemed so perfect from the outside, had begun to lose its luster. He felt like a man who had everything, but also nothing at all. Arius had spent so long convincing himself that success and wealth were the ultimate goals, the ultimate markers of a life well lived. But now, with everything in place, he found himself questioning whether those things mattered at all. He had abandoned Sophia, his first love, his partner, and in doing so, he had lost a piece of himself. The guilt settled deep inside him, a constant companion that he could never escape. No matter how many accolades he received, no matter how much money he made, it didn't change the fact that he had chosen success over the one person who had truly believed in him from the beginning. And now, as he looked at Zara, with all her excitement and allure, he realized she wasn't the answer. She couldn't fill the emptiness. She couldn't heal the wounds he had caused. In his heart, Arius knew the truth. He had sacrificed love, trust, and the future they could have had, all for a life that was ultimately unfulfilling. The guilt of what he had done to Sophia and to himself was a weight that no amount of success could lift. The day Sophia returned to the city was like any other, at least from the outside. Arius, deep in the chaos of managing his company, hadn't expected it. The news hit him like a jolt to the chest. Sophia, the woman he had left behind, was coming back. She wasn't just visiting. She was coming to speak at a prestigious architectural conference, the same conference he had once promised to attend with her, back when they had dreams of building something together. It was one of those events where the top minds in architecture gathered to share their visions for the future. It was a milestone for Sophia, and yet for Arius, it felt like a slap in the face. He had heard about it through a business associate. They mentioned her name casually, Sophia Velmont, now an accomplished architect, invited as a keynote speaker. Arius had felt the air leave his lungs. He wasn't prepared to see her again, especially not in a setting like this, where her success would shine in a way he could no longer overshadow. He tried to push the thought out of his mind, focusing on the meetings and commitments of the day, but it lingered, gnawing at him. The thought of seeing her again, of confronting everything he had left behind, stirred a strange cocktail of emotions inside him. As the days passed, Arius's thoughts about the upcoming event became harder to ignore. He couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to see her again. Would she still be the woman he had known, the one who had stood by him in the quiet, humble beginnings? Or had she become someone else, someone beyond the reach of the man who had once broken her heart? The day of the event arrived faster than he expected, and with it came the inevitable confrontation. Arius found himself standing in the grand hall, surrounded by some of the brightest minds in architecture. But despite the faces in the room, it was Sophia's presence that stole his attention. She was on stage now, her words flowing confidently as she spoke to the crowd. She was no longer the woman he had walked away from. Her poise, her power, the quiet strength she exuded, she was a different person. Arius couldn't help but stare. His heart raced, and for the first time in years, he felt that familiar sense of longing, the desire to go back to the way things had been. But that longing was quickly met with the bitter realization that things could never go back. She had moved on. She was no longer the woman he could control or convince with his apologies. Sophia's return wasn't just a chance to reconnect. It was a reminder of everything he had lost. She wasn't the same vulnerable woman he had left behind. She had built a life without him, a life that didn't need his approval or presence. The moment Arius saw Sophia from across the room, everything else seemed to disappear. The conference hall, filled with eager faces and intelligent minds, faded into the background. All he could see was her. It wasn't just the way she looked, it was the way she carried herself, the undeniable confidence in her posture, the ease with which she commanded the room. She was different, not just physically, though time had undoubtedly been kind to her. The woman standing there wasn't the fragile wife he had left behind. This Sophia was assured, self-sufficient, and completely in control of her own destiny. At first, Arius couldn't believe it. It wasn't disbelief in the sense of not recognizing her. Of course, he could see. It was her, but disbelief in the fact that she had transformed so completely. The woman he had abandoned, the one he had left in search of a different kind of excitement, had emerged from the ashes stronger than he could have ever imagined. She no longer needed him. The realization hit him hard. He had thought that by choosing Zara, by pursuing the life of power and indulgence, he would find something more fulfilling. But seeing Sophia now, standing confidently in front of the crowd, speaking about the very career she had sacrificed, for him, Arius understood something painful. She didn't need him to be who she was meant to be. The guilt, which had been quietly lingering in the background for so long, now surged forward, flooding his chest. It was as if he could physically feel the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. He had pushed her aside, made her feel like she was less important, and now, here she was, succeeding without him. He couldn't take his eyes off her, and yet, he was terrified of what this moment meant. How could he even approach her? What could he say? The woman he had once called his partner, the woman he had promised to build a future with, was now beyond him. His mind raced, 1,000 questions swirling in his head. What did she think of him now? Did she still hold some part of their past close to her heart? Or had he erased everything they had, leaving no room for reconciliation? Sophia wasn't just a reminder of what he had lost. She was a testament to what he had failed to recognize in the first place. She had rebuilt her life, her career, and her purpose, and she had done it all without him. Arius was no longer the man who had left her behind. He was a man full of regret, full of self-doubt, and standing before the woman who had once been his everything, he realized how far he had fallen. As Arius stood there, the weight of his past choices pressing down on him, a single thought lingered in his mind. Does he deserve a second chance? Sophia had moved on. She had rebuilt herself, found peace, and even created a life of her own without him. But as the regret flooded his chest, Arius couldn't help but wonder, could he ever be forgiven? Could he make amends for the pain he had caused her? Or was the damage irreversible? What do you think? Should Arius be given another chance to redeem himself? Or has the time for that passed? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this emotional journey. Comment below with your opinions on whether someone can truly rebuild a relationship after betraying the one they love. Do you believe in second chances, or do some things just stay broken? Like, share, and subscribe if you want to continue following this journey of redemption, love, and forgiveness. The charity gala was one of the most anticipated events of the year, an evening filled with the city's elite, lavish decorations and conversations that could shape the future of the most powerful companies. Arius Velmont, as always, was at the center of it all. Beside him was Zara, her charm and beauty drawing eyes from all corners of the room. They moved through the crowd like the perfect couple, unreachable, untouchable, a symbol of success. But for Arius, the night had taken on a new weight. When he had first arrived at the gala, his usual confidence had been unwavering, his mind focused on the evening's potential deals. But now, it was all about Sophia. He hadn't expected her to show up, not here, not tonight. Yet, there she was, walking into the room with Darian by her side. The sight of her took his breath away. Sophia, standing across the room, looked nothing like the woman he had left behind. She was confident, her presence commanding attention, her movements purposeful. She wasn't here to chase the excitement he had run toward. She was here for herself, and the quiet power she radiated made Arius feel small in comparison. Sophia's gaze swept the room, and for a fleeting moment their eyes locked. The air between them seemed to grow thick with unspoken words, a history that neither could escape, yet neither could change. Arius's pulse quickened. The regret, so long buried, flooded back with full force. All those years of living without her, of building a life that lacked depth, it all came crashing down. He had walked away from the woman who had loved him unconditionally, the woman who had been his foundation. And now, he saw her standing there, thriving, with a life that no longer needed him. Zara noticed Arius's shift in focus, her hand lightly brushing his arm, but he barely registered her presence. His mind was consumed with the vision of Sophia, standing confidently in the midst of it all. Sophia smiled and exchanged a few words with a colleague, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a distance now, an unspoken wall between them, and as Arius watched her move through the crowd, he was filled with an overwhelming realization. She had moved on. The gala carried on, the music playing softly in the background as people networked and celebrated. Arius tried to focus on the conversations happening around him, but his mind was no longer in the room. His gaze kept drifting back to Sophia. He watched her from across the room, her confidence, her grace. She seemed so far removed from the woman he had left behind. After the event, as the crowd began to thin, Arius found himself moving toward her, almost instinctively. He had to see her. He had to speak to her, to tell her that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake. He didn't expect forgiveness, but the need to apologize, to offer some kind of closure, was overpowering. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding. As he neared Sophia, a feeling of uncertainty crept over him. How could he approach her after everything? What could he say that wouldn't feel hollow? "Sophia," he said, his voice soft yet urgent. Sophia turned slowly, her expression unreadable. There was no warmth in her gaze, but no anger either, just a calm detachment. It wasn't the look of a woman who had forgiven him. It was the look of someone who had long since moved past the pain he had caused. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight," he began, his words fumbling slightly as he tried to find the right way to start. Sophia looked at him with a quiet strength. "I wasn't expecting to see you either, Arius." The words hit him harder than he expected. She didn't say them with malice or coldness, but there was a distance in her voice that made his chest tighten. I've thought about you, about us," Arius continued, his voice faltering slightly. "I never meant for it to end this way. I never wanted to hurt you." Sophia didn't interrupt, but her gaze never wavered. She listened, but it was clear she wasn't holding on to the past. "I'm sorry for everything I did," Arius added, "for abandoning you, for letting you down. I was wrong. I see that now." Sophia remained silent for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. The silence between them felt so vast, so final. Then she spoke, her voice steady and calm, but firm. "I don't need your apology, Arius," she said quietly. "I've spent years forgiving you in my own way, but I'm not that woman anymore. I've moved on." Arius's heart sank. He had expected her to say something, but this finality was more than he was prepared for. She wasn't angry, she wasn't bitter. She had simply become someone else, someone who no longer needed him. Arius couldn't escape the weight of Sophia's words, and the silence between them felt heavier than he ever imagined. But it wasn't just the distance between him and Sophia that hung in the air. There was Darian. Their son, now a teenager, stood just a few steps away, watching the exchange with quiet curiosity. Arius hadn't seen Darian in years, and the boy had grown so much. He was no longer the small child Arius had once held in his arms. Now, Darian was tall, his posture confident, his expression guarded. The years of his absence had shaped him into someone Arius didn't recognize. As Arius turned to face his son, the hope that had been flickering in his chest dimmed. Darian met his gaze with a look that was a mixture of curiosity and something else, something that felt like a wall, one Arius wasn't sure how to break through. "Hey, Darian," Arius said, his voice filled with uncertainty. It's been a while." Darian didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step back, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Arius felt the weight of his son's cold reception like a physical blow. It wasn't the warm embrace he had imagined, the reunion he had hoped for. There was no excitement, no joy in seeing his father again. "Yeah, it's been a while," Darian finally responded, his voice calm but distant. Arius's heart sank. The silence between them stretched out for what felt like an eternity, each second more unbearable than the last. He tried again, his voice softer this time. "I've missed you, Darian. Darian cut him off before he could finish. "You missed me?" His tone was low but sharp. "You didn't even bother to call or come see me. How can you say you missed me?" Arius froze. He had expected anger, disappointment, maybe even a little resentment. But hearing it spoken so plainly, he wasn't prepared for that. "I was busy, Darian," Arius started, the words coming out more weakly than he wanted. "I've been—" "You were busy?" Darian interrupted, his voice steady but laced with something bitter. "You were busy enough to leave us, but not busy enough to actually be here. I'm fine, Arius. I've had to grow up without you. Mom's been there, not you. So don't stand here and act like you've been thinking about me all these years." The weight of Darian's words struck Arius harder than anything Sophia had said. He wanted to argue, to explain himself, to make it right, but there was nothing he could say to fix the years he had missed, the pain he had caused. Darian turned away, his back now facing Arius. He wasn't rude, just distant. The silence was deafening. Arius stood there, his chest tightening. This wasn't just about Sophia anymore. This was about the family he had abandoned, the son he had left behind, and the consequences that had rippled through both their lives. Darian was no longer the little boy who had clung to him with trusting hands. He was a young man, shaped by years of abandonment, by the absence of the father who should have been there. And now, standing before him, Arius realized just how much he had lost. Not just Sophia, his son too. Sophia had long since accepted the fact that life with Arius was over. The pain of their separation, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. It had all been difficult, but not insurmountable. In the years since, she had built a life that no longer needed to be defined by the man she once loved. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece. When she had left the life she knew, Sophia had been uncertain of what the future would hold. But now, standing in front of Arius, she was sure of one thing. She had found herself again. The woman who once clung to the hope of a family with Arius no longer existed. That woman had been lost in the pursuit of a dream that was no longer her own. The Sophia who stood before him was a different person, stronger, more self-assured, and no longer looking for validation from anyone, least of all him. Sophia no longer needed Arius to complete her. She had learned that her worth didn't lie in anyone else's approval. The life she had built, the strength she had found in herself, was all her own. Her heart was no longer heavy with the grief of what had been lost. She had made peace with their past, and in doing so, she had moved on. There was a quiet pride in her eyes, a calm confidence that Arius couldn't ignore. She wasn't angry with him. She wasn't bitter, but she was no longer bound to him, no longer defined by the man who had walked away. Sophia had found something far more valuable than the love she had once given to Arius. She had found herself, and that, in the end, had been her greatest victory. Arius stood there, the weight of everything crashing down on him as he watched Sophia, the woman he had once loved, the woman he had abandoned, standing in front of him with a quiet strength he hadn't known she possessed. He had thought leaving her behind, leaving the life they had built together, would bring him the freedom he craved. He had told himself that his pursuit of success, his need to be at the top, was what mattered most. But now, in the face of her resilience, his success felt hollow. The guilt that had always lingered in the back of his mind surged forward. He could no longer ignore it. He could no longer hide from the truth. Arius had not only lost Sophia, he had lost the man he could have been. The years he had spent building his empire, chasing power and wealth, had come at a cost. The life he had thought would bring him happiness had left him empty. The woman he had once called his equal, the one who had been by his side through every trial, was now a stranger, no longer someone who needed his validation or approval. She had healed, moved on, and built a life without him. He had lost everything that truly mattered in his pursuit of more. In the quiet moments of reflection, Arius realized just how much he had sacrificed for a hollow version of success. He had let his ego, his need for validation, dictate the choices that had torn his family apart. And now, looking at Sophia, seeing her confidence and strength, he was confronted with a painful truth. He had lost more than just her. He had lost the man he was when he was with her, the man who had loved with his whole heart and believed that love, not wealth, was what would sustain him. The cost of his choices, his selfishness, his pride, was clear. The emptiness that had once felt so distant now consumed him, and for the first time in years, Arius understood the price of his actions. Sophia's path had not been easy, but it had been her own. Every decision she had made, every step she had taken since leaving Arius, had been a choice to rebuild, not just for herself but for Darian. She had once believed that the success of her marriage was everything, that Arius was her world. But as the years had passed, she had realized that her strength did not come from being by his side, it came from within her. She had moved past the pain, past the resentment, and had found peace in the life she had created. And now, standing before Arius, she felt a sense of closure that she hadn't known she needed until this very moment. "Darian is growing into a fine young man," she said, her voice steady, no hint of bitterness. "He's strong, independent, everything I hoped he would be." She paused, her eyes meeting Arius's with a quiet, resolute gaze. "He doesn't need you, Arius. But he's never lacked love, he's never lacked strength." Arius swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting him with a force he hadn't anticipated. Darian, the son he had abandoned, was thriving without him. Sophia had given him everything he needed, everything Arius had failed to provide. Sophia continued, her tone firm yet gentle. "I've forgiven you, Arius, not because you asked, but because I needed to. I needed to free myself from the pain of our past. I'm no longer angry, and I'm no longer waiting. I've healed, and I've built a life full of love and purpose. Without you." The words settled in the air between them, and for the first time, Arius understood. She wasn't waiting for him to fix what was broken. She had moved on, found her own strength, and built a life for herself and Darian. She turned to Darian, who had been standing quietly by her side. "Darian," she said, her voice softening, "this is your father." Darian glanced at Arius, his expression unchanged. He didn't step forward, didn't reach out. He simply nodded, his cool demeanor speaking volumes. The years of absence, the years of being ignored, were written all over his face. Arius couldn't blame him. There was no anger in Darian's eyes, only a quiet understanding. Arius took a step forward, but Darian took a step back, putting the space between them into sharp focus. The silence between father and son was deafening. The years of separation, of missed moments, hung between them like an insurmountable wall. Sophia watched this exchange with a calmness that only added to the weight of the moment. She had healed. She had moved on, and Arius was left standing in the ruins of the family he had destroyed. Sophia's path had not been easy, but it had been her own. Every decision she had made, every step she had taken since leaving Arius, had been a choice to rebuild, not just for herself, but for Darian. She had once believed that the success of her marriage was everything, that Arius was her world. But as the years had passed, she had realized that her strength did not come from being by his side. It came from within her. She had moved past the pain, past the resentment, and had found peace in the life she had created. And now, standing before Arius, she felt a sense of closure that she hadn't known she needed until this very moment. "Darian is growing into a fine young man," she said, her voice steady, no hint of bitterness. "He's strong, independent, everything I hoped he would be." She paused, her eyes meeting Arius's with a quiet, resolute gaze. "He doesn't need you, Arius, but he's never lacked love, he's never lacked strength." Arius swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting him with a force he hadn't anticipated. Darian, the son he had abandoned, was thriving without him. Sophia had given him everything he needed, everything Arius had failed to provide. Sophia continued, her tone firm yet gentle. I've forgiven you, Arius. Not because you asked, but because I needed to. I needed to free myself from the pain of our past. I'm no longer angry, and I'm no longer waiting. I've healed, and I've built a life full of love and purpose. Without you, the words settled in the air between them, and for the first time, Arius understood. She wasn't waiting for him to fix what was broken. She had moved on, found her own strength, and built a life for herself and Darian. She turned to Darian, who had been standing quietly by her side. "Darian," she said, her voice softening, "this is your father." Darian glanced at Arius, his expression unchanged. He didn't step forward, didn't reach out. He simply nodded, his cool demeanor speaking volumes. The years of absence, the years of being ignored, were written all over his face. Arius couldn't blame him. There was no anger in Darian's eyes, only a quiet understanding. Arius took a step forward, but Darian took a step back, putting the space between them into sharp focus. The silence between father and son was deafening. The years of separation, of missed moments, hung between them like an insurmountable wall. Sophia watched this exchange with a calmness that only added to the weight of the moment. She had healed. She had moved on, and Arius was left standing in the ruins of the family he had destroyed. At its core, this story is a reflection on the choices we make and the impact they have, not just on our own lives, but on the lives of those we love. Arius's journey is one of regret, guilt, and the long road toward understanding the true cost of his actions. The real lesson here isn't just about redemption, it's about growth. Arius's story shows us that sometimes success and wealth are not enough. They can never fill the emptiness left behind by broken relationships, by neglecting the people who truly matter. His path toward redemption is not about winning back Sophia's love. It's about confronting the reality of his mistakes, acknowledging the hurt he caused, and learning to be a better version of himself. True growth comes from understanding the consequences of selfish choices and learning to act from a place of integrity, not self-interest. Sophia's departure, her rebuilding of her life without him, was the wake-up call Arius needed. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of his own self-discovery. The lesson is clear. No matter how far you fall, no matter how much you've lost, it's never too late to start making better choices. Redemption doesn't come from external validation. It comes from within, from owning your mistakes and using them to become a stronger, more self-aware person. Great. Sophia's journey is a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit and the ability to rise from even the most painful experiences. Her path was not an easy one, but it is a story of resilience, self-empowerment, and the quiet power of moving forward. When Arius left her, it would have been easy to fall into despair, to become consumed by anger and regret. But Sophia didn't allow herself to stay in the shadow of betrayal. Instead, she took control of her life. She didn't wait for someone else to fix what was broken. She fixed it herself. She rebuilt not only her career, but her sense of self, finding a new purpose in the very things Arius had once sidelined. In a world that often encourages people to look outward for validation, His story reminds us that the most important validation comes from within. She didn't need Arius's love to define her worth. She didn't need his approval to thrive. Through the pain of their past, she found the strength to be her own source of love, her own source of power. Sophia shows us that even after betrayal, it is possible to find happiness again. She didn't just move on from the past, she used it as a stepping stone to become the woman she is today. Her journey is a reminder that no one is ever truly powerless. We can all rebuild, even from the most broken pieces, and find the strength to create a new, fulfilling life for ourselves. As we come to the end of this journey, we are reminded of the power of choices, the importance of self-love, and the resilience that lies within us all. Arius's path toward redemption is still uncertain, but the key lesson here is clear. Growth comes from acknowledging our mistakes, learning from them, and becoming better versions of ourselves. And just as importantly, Sophia's strength shows us that no matter what we face, we have the ability to rebuild and move forward with purpose and grace. If you've been inspired by this story of love, regret, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to the Channel for more powerful stories that will make you reflect on the choices that shape your own life. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson, someone who might be struggling with their own journey of self-discovery and healing. Together, we can continue learning, growing, and sharing the lessons that help us all become better. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more.